about it at several points throughout the count. As each camera angle came up and kind of rotated through the views, some of us in the management room were seeing certain views of the tank we hadn't seen before, and we'd asked the engineering team, hey, does that look like that's growing? And every single time the ice team actually came back and said it's the same exact condition as it was when we were there, and nothing has changed. There's no growth here, so we didn't have any worries with that. In fact, like I said, the experts who do this every day didn't have any worries whatsoever with the frost.
And for the second question, during the scrub yesterday, there was some talk on the net during the final go no go poll about someone getting comfortable putting forth a waiver for the RTLS cloud deck limit. Could you just, what was the thought process behind that? I mean, obviously it didn't happen and we were no go for launch, but do you know the thought process behind that?
Yeah, we have, our flight rules cover what we need for RTLS in terms of ceiling and visibility. It's a 4,000 foot or 5,000 foot for RTLS. And then we have range rules for visibility, and those sit at about 4,000 depending on thicknesses of clouds above it. But basically we've always had this slight disconnect between what the range would be go for and what the RTLS landing would be go for, and they're off by about 1,000 feet. And so over the years we've learned to constantly evaluate, if you have a condition that is acceptable for the range but not acceptable for RTLS, what does it take to be acceptable? And each of the pilots go and practice various visibility runs. They learn what they need to have to be comfortable that night, what would be good, what would be bad. And really you're looking for a deck that allows you to gain the horizon as you're rolling around the hack, and you understand clearly where you're at. And last night we had that in the fact that there was nothing above that deck, so clear skies up to that point. And then you look at the thickness of it as you go through it. So you've got a good reference point, you know where you're coming through, you punch through the ceiling really fast so you know you're on your approach path. And once you get through, it's clear and down. The other big factor is what's the wind doing from about 10,000 feet on down, and the workload that then drives the pilot. If all he has to do is pay attention to that glide slope as he comes in, that's a little more acceptable. So we really send the STA up there to fly that path and characterize that for us with the intent of knowing, the rule on the book that you write hard and fast is good, but no exact observation is the exact same thing. And so we send the STA, or shuttle training aircraft, with the astronauts up to go fly that approach and see what it really was. So what we were talking about yesterday was, could we get comfortable with the fact that even though we were a little bit lower than our limits, that we had a good flight? And we were debating back and forth as to how comfortable we really were there, and we just didn't get there on either that or the range yesterday. Just we weren't going to go there.
I just might add a little bit to that, from the launch perspective, and to sum that up a little bit, maybe there were two groups working the weather last night. Flight director out of Houston and the range safety guys here over in Cape Side. Both groups were no-go, and they were both talking about how could they get to go. And so what we heard on the net was that the flight director probably could have gotten there. I never got comfortable at all that the range was going to get there. In fact, we heard no discussion at all about a waiver on the net, and so they were clearly no-go all the way down to T0, and indeed at T0 they were violating their criteria. So as a launch director, you evaluate those things. Even if we'd gotten go on both of those, I would have been hard-pressed to keep going. I thought we were getting to the point where we might have been pressing a little bit too hard. And one of the things that's in my job jar is to make sure we don't get launch fever. Not saying we had it last night, but we were probably getting to the point where it was getting kind of close to that issue. So, you listen to that, you listen to the rationale for developing the waiver, and then you ask yourself the hard question, do we really have good reason to go fly tonight, or should we stand down? And, last night we were no-go from a range safety perspective all the way down to T0, so we never really had to implement the prerogative that I have of saying, it's just not a good night to go fly. But we were getting close to that last night, and so I think we probably would have stood down.
Tarek? Thank you. Tarek Malik with Space.com and Space News. I wanted to follow up. The first one's from Mike Leinbach. You promised before launch that you expected it was going to be spectacular. I'm just kind of curious, as you watched it fly over Cape Hatteras, was it spectacular? What were your thoughts, knowing this is probably the last light launch that you and your team are going to see or have the nation see? If you can kind of expand on that a little bit, that'd be great.
Well, it lit up the Kennedy Space Center. I was looking out the windows of the control center and then looking down on the ground to see how bright it gets, and that's a special view. I watched it through SRB separation, saw it very clearly, and then it disappeared behind some clouds, and I got kind of disappointed. But it broke out of those clouds, and that's when I was able to see it all the way out to 7 minutes in flight off Cape Hatteras. So, for the last night launch, it treated us well. I think everybody appreciated it.
And for Mike Moses, I'm just curious, given the scrub yesterday, what your thoughts are on hopefully getting that contingency day or in space, the extension day. Would you still want to use it now, or would you want to save that for weather?
Yeah, we already have the weather contingencies that we need for the rules, so this is a day above and beyond that. And then with the launch only on a second attempt, we actually are carrying some margin in our cryogenic systems that we have about a day extra above and beyond that. So from a consumable standpoint, we look to be in really good shape. And it's way too hard to make the call. We got to get a lot closer to see what the conditions really are, and look at a preliminary forecast for entry before we start deciding and trade off against what other stuff is going on, and is there anything else we need to. So it's way too early to tell.
Todd?
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Mike Leinbach. I think all of us would kind of like to see it do it again. Can you give us a status on Discovery in the next launch campaign and where you are in the flow, and whether you think that March 18th is a good, valid date?
Yeah, I'll just go cut to the chase. March 18th right now looks real good. We're going to roll Discovery out of the OPF on the 11th of February next week. Spend about a week in the VAB like we normally do, and then out to the launch pad on the 18th, and we have a few days of contingency even out the launch pad. So on paper right now, everything looks good, and the ship is behaving. In fact, we could probably even beat rollout by a couple of days if we wanted to. So right now, that next flight is looking really, really good for us.
Thanks. This is Dirk Wagner from German radio, Hessischer Rundfunk. We all had the privilege to go out there and just look at the launch and being sort of awestruck by it. I wonder, perhaps this is for one of the two mics, that question, when's the moment when, because you are so focused on your work during countdown, during liftoff, when is that moment where you can just relieve, breathe out and say, where we did it?
Where we can breathe and say, yeah, we did it. Well, T0 is special when the vehicle jumps off the pad. So we know we're flying at that point. It's that point where we turn control over to the flight directors in Houston, Norm Knight, for this mission. His team did a fabulous job. And we don't celebrate in the control room until we get to orbit, until the main engine shut down and we know we're safely in orbit. Then the team cheers and celebrates and pets each other on the back, and we're able to go out and party.
We're going to come around to this side of the room and take a few questions, and then we'll get back to James Dean and others on this side. Go ahead.
Hi, Nancy Atkinson from Astronomy Cast and Universe Today. I think you've answered this at a previous press conference, but I can't remember the answer. The covers on the windows of the cupola, do they come off during the mission, and will the crew be able to look out?
Let's see, it launched with a big, we call it MLI, which is an insulation blanket that covers the outside of the cupola. And so that insulation blanket will be pulled off by the EVA crew, and then there's window shade covers that are on each of the windows that will be individually opened and closed as need be. I don't remember the exact restrictions on use there, but basically, like when the shuttle undocks, those covers will be closed so that there's no impact, to degrade the windows, that kind of thing. So yeah, we'll take the hard insulation or the soft insulation covers off that were there for launch, and then they do have permanent covers that kind of like a shutter.
The shutters will be closed predominantly most of the time, except because they're protecting from micrometeoroid debris damage. So it'll be some event that needs them to be opened, and we'll go open them. And I don't recall if they get opened during this mission or not. It depends, again, I think, on some thermal conditioning and some other things. But I think the crew will very much want to do that. So if it works out from a thermal physics engineering standpoint, they'll be opened, and I'm sure the crew will give us some views.
Ken?
Hi, Ken Kramer from Spaceflight Magazine and the Planetary Society for Mr. Dodane. Could you describe a little bit what the two ESA astronauts will do? And with the extension of the ISS, do you have plan to construct more ATVs to more fully utilize the space station then?
For the two astronauts, Roberto Vittori will be on the shuttle flight, bringing the AMS-2 to the space station. So it will be a short duration flight as part of the shuttle crew. For what concerns Paolo Despoli, it will be launched by